Hey everybody, welcome to Boiled as an Owl. My name is Dave F. and I'll be your host. So sit back and let's dive in. So I entitled this episode The Meaning of Powerlessness. And the reason I chose that title is because when we begin our adventure into sobriety, and I call it an adventure because it really is an adventure. Essentially what ends up happening is, we get to a point where our lives are so unmanageable and so absolutely devoid of any substance that, the only logical step in the journey is to just truly admit powerlessness. And I'm not talking about, having a few drinks here and there and maybe smoking a joint or, having a little bit of fun at a party. I'm talking about the points where it seems like a really good idea to get hammered, to do drugs, to numb out, because every aspect of life is handing you pretty much a curveball. And those curveballs are being presented to you because you're the one who's at the center of the stage. So what I've noticed, even in my own travels this last 5 years, is that the only way I could honestly get through to the other side of some semblance of thriving was to truly admit utter defeat. Okay? And in order to do that, I had to surrender. So what I'm finding, in those first days of being, completely just baffled at my life and just really not understanding why everything was happening to me, and just not understanding that actually life was not happening to me. It was happening because of me. And all of the poor choices I was making in that time frame of my life. Because as I alluded to in the first episode, I had really gotten to a point where things just got really bad. I would look in the mirror and I was really angry at what looked back at me. It was a shell of a person, and it wasn't even someone I recognized, and that's what I was mentioning. So, for me, getting to the point where I was actually able to just literally say, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. I need help. That was huge, And the funny thing about step one is that step one is actually all about honesty, because we get to a point where, we're no longer able to keep the lie up of our life, and we end up having to look for a whole new set of principles to live by, because we kind of understand that if we don't start living better, life is really just going to be pointless, and there's going to be no real rhyme or reason for it. So, I look back at that first day, and it's kind of funny because January 15th, this coming Wednesday of 2025, will be my 5-year anniversary. And I was talking about my journey with a couple of people a few days ago, and what's interesting about it is I got sober on my own. I didn't need detoxes. I didn't need any of that stuff. I was one of the lucky ones. I never got so bad that I needed a detox or I needed to, go away somewhere in order to get my life together. I always had a line and I always kind of stayed at the line. Habitually stepped over the line, but I never really let myself go so far that I couldn't come back because I had an uncle who drank himself to death, and I did see what alcoholism did to him. And I have relatives who had some issues with alcohol. I've had friends who lost the battle. I've had friends who were heroin addicts. I mean, you name it. I've been privy to it on some level, and it's interesting because even talking about that stuff, it was always like this. Well, at least I'm not like that guy or that gal. At least I have my shit together. Didn't have my shit together at all. So, it was interesting. I was very judgmental and I was very insecure, and I always wanted to be the smartest person in the room, the most put together person in the room. And I never was because it was all a facade. And it was just this, giant ego of mine pretending that I had some idea of where I was going to go with my life and have some idea where I was better than you because at least I didn't need to go to a detox, and at least I didn't do this, and at least I was traveling, and at least I could go here and go there and do my thing. Which is really funny too, because I was on Friday, I went to a meeting and we were reading We Agnostics. It was the second half of the actual chapter in the big book. And the chairman was so eloquent, just such a great speaker, who understood the mechanics of the big book, how it was put together, and how each chapter unfolds stepwise. And, you have Bill's story and we get to see all the powerlessness there, and we get to see all the first step stuff. And, the whole idea is the addiction has had its way with you, whatever that addiction is. And you have to admit complete and utter powerlessness, right? We admitted that we were powerless over alcohol, and you could be powerless over food, powerless over narcotics, powerless over anything, people, places, and things, right? And it's in that powerlessness that you learn how to surrender. So, Chairman's talking about the agnostic piece and how, we've come to this idea that we're powerless, that something outside of ourselves, or not even outside of ourselves, that something has to restore us to sanity, okay? And that we're willing to do whatever it takes to have whatever that power is actually, give us our sanity back, because we're at the point where you find yourself, whether you're an alcoholic or an addict, where you find yourself so out of control and life so unmanageable. You're at a point of no return, because it's either keep going forward in the madness or stop digging the hole that you've dug for yourself. And what I realized on Friday was that as this chairman was explaining the literature, I started getting really angry. And I have been angry for a while. You talk about powerlessness. The fourth year of my sobriety was one of the hardest years of all of the sobriety that I had. And I hit a wall. I didn't get complacent per se, but I didn't go to as many meetings as I normally went to. Also, the biggest reasons I didn't go to meetings was I found that since COVID, it's always the same 30, 40, 50 people that go to meetings. And you just hear the same thing over and over and over and over again. And at some point in my belief system, it's like, yeah, you hear this stuff over again. I don't have a built-in forgetter. I hear that comment all the time in meetings, and it makes me nuts because I don't have a built-in forgetter. I remember how shitty my life was, and I remember how insane I was, and just how out of control everything was at one point. Because, like I was saying in my previous episode, I had such a toxic relationship with my second wife, and it bred such contempt and such anger between the two of us, and it was really, really hard to navigate all that. And I got sober during COVID. Okay, so January 15th, 2020, and I'm sober now 6 months. Okay, and the reason I'm explaining this part is so that you can understand the anger. And I was doing Wim Hof method. I was doing cold plunges, working out, CrossFitting, you name it. I was doing everything I could. The only thing I wasn't doing was meetings, sponsorships, and steps. Unfortunately, the first couple months before everything started going to hell with COVID and restrictions and lockdowns and all that, meetings kind of stopped, and there was only a few places, and meetings weren't even on my mind. So what propelled me in my sobriety that I did myself for the first 6 months was the fact that I finally left my home because my second wife kicked me out and said, "Get the hell out of here. I can't handle you anymore." And I said, "No problem." And so I left, and I was doing my thing, and everything was going well. But I was really angry because I didn't have any emotional sobriety. So my anger was just, it was like boiling in my guts. And for a while, I was having a lot of issues with my son. Okay, my son and I did not have the best of relationships. I was very hard on him. And the reason was because my father was hard on me. And for whatever reason, in my insanity, I was like, oh, I hated it, but maybe it'll be good for him. And what my son needed was a softer, kinder, more understanding father, not an overbearing, angry, like, you got to do this or I'm going to yell at you kind of a dad. And unfortunately, that's the dad he got. So when he turned 18, which was, a couple months before COVID, he ended up saying, to hell with this. And he ended up moving in with his mother, my first wife. And when COVID happened, he approached my parents and he asked them if he could live there at their home. And they said, yes, not a problem. And he ponied up a good chunk of money, and he helped my father build out the basement, and they made it into a really nice apartment. Kid has his own shower and his own bathroom, and he's doing well. And I think because he had finally achieved, that age, he was kind of like, you know what? F this dude. And that was that. So he got snarky with me. Every time I would see him, he'd give me some kind of attitude, and it was like, whatever. And one day he said something that really just, it burned a hole in me to the point where I got triggered. Okay. So triggers in and of themselves are usually indicative of not a lot of emotional sobriety, because you're allowing your emotions to get the better of you. And because of that, you're just a whirlwind, and you're on fire, and everything's just sucks. So he says what he says. And this is about, I think it's June 30th. And I ended up seeing red, and I followed him downstairs, and I just started badgering him. And then he proceeded to call me a clown, call me an asshole, like you name it, whatever. And the craziest part about it was he was right, because those were all the feelings I was having for myself. And I was so angry at him for saying that stuff, because even though I was feeling it, I didn't want to have any belief in any of the stuff he was saying. And I was so broken by that. And we got into a shoving match and whatever. No punches thrown. Nothing of that sort. But what ended up happening was my parents got scared, because, my son's a tall, big guy. I'm a big guy. And the police were called, and I ended up in jail. And when I was in that cell, and again, this is my experiences, and I'm very honest about everything. And I don't care what anyone thinks of me, because you know what? I'm my harshest critic. So it doesn't really matter. But what matters is we're not alone in a lot of this stuff, and a lot of us have go through this crap. And it's just nice to know that there's other people who have experienced this kind of stuff too. So I'm in the cell, and I am just flabbergasted, because I'm like, wow, I've been sober for 6 months and I got arrested. I can't believe that. Usually, you get arrested when you're drunk, or you're doing dumb shit because you're just hammered and you don't give a shit. Well, I ended up getting arrested because I did give a shit, because of what was being said about me, and how I was feeling about myself was literally being mirrored by my own child. And I realized in that moment, when I was in the jail cell, that I needed help. So I reached out to a buddy. He then put me in touch with one of his friends, and the friend, he knew I was batshit crazy because where I was at emotionally and mentally, and I don't think he could handle me. So he ended up kind of pushing me off to another gentleman who ended up, we ended up talking, and we ended up meeting. And after a bunch of weeks, he decided that he would take me through the big book and the steps and all the great stuff there. So that said, I ended up getting in my lap a sponsor. I didn't have to try. I didn't have to do anything. And on the 4th of July, I went to my first meeting of 2020. I found out that there were a few locations that were actually having people. You had to sit a chair apart, and there could only be 25 people in the room. We had to wear masks. And I went to that meeting, and I was sitting in the chair, and one of the gentlemen at the club comes up to me and he puts his hand on my shoulder. He's like, "Relax, kid, you're on fire." And I looked at him and I just started bawling. I mean, like ugly cry, tears just streaming down my face. I was completely and utterly defeated. I had nothing left. And at that point, I was just getting my ass chewed out by my wife, and my parents didn't know what to do with me. And I was just a mess. And I went to those meetings in those early days for me. And I mean, I think I experienced a whole nother level of powerlessness that I had never experienced before in my life. I mean, the slightest thing was making me cry. I was so emotional and I was just so raw and broken, and every aspect of me was just this. It was like being a blob. I just, I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know anything at that point, and I chose to surrender to a higher power. I chose to be powerless for once in my life and not pretend that I knew what I was doing. And I just stopped. I stopped digging my hole. I stopped making myself sick, and I just stopped and I started listening. And what I found is the principle of honesty, which is literally our step one, willing, honest, and open, willing to do whatever it takes to change the previous lifestyle and lifestyle choices, honest about the previous life and the lifestyle choices, and then open enough to be able to listen to others and to take suggestions and actually change. And it was so funny because that was all the stuff I was doing the first 4 years. And then this last year, I just got very annoyed with everything, myself mostly, because all I could ever say was, is it ever going to get better? Is there anything more to this? And it's so funny because, again, the band Fish, right? They have a song called More, and the lead singer, Trey, he's in recovery, and all the music he writes now is all recovery music pretty much. And it's so funny because the people that aren't in recovery can't stand it because it's so like and cheesy and stuff. But you know what? When you're in recovery, you listen to music, you're like, oh, I understand why you're writing this music, But being at that meeting last week, the anger that came out of me when I shared, I literally wanted everyone to know where I was at. And I needed people to know how angry I was. And I was having coffee with a couple friends today in the program. And, I literally texted one of them and I was like, oh my God, I just shit on everyone's parade at a meeting. And I don't even care, And then over the weekend, I processed it all. And what I realized is I'm feeling powerless again. I have no control over anything. And because I feel like I have no control over anything, which I don't, the only thing I have control over is myself and how I show up in the world. And that's the biggest issue I find with alcoholics, addicts, just people in general. We want control so badly, but we don't have any control. And so we mostly walk through our days powerless and angry and bitter. And it's just, it just eats you up inside. You're irritable and discontent because life isn't going the way you wanted it to go. And it's not doing it the way you think it should be, and yada, yada, yada. And what ends up happening is, that's you not accepting that life is happening on life's terms. So my life is really good, right? I don't really have much to be angry about at this point. Business is doing really well. I enjoy my life, but there's parts and pieces of it that aren't so great. And I was just sharing all this anger that had accumulated this last year in this meeting. And what I realized was that I am in a place where I'm just grasping and holding on to old patterns of behavior. I realize that my whole life, I've just wanted to create chaos and insanity because peace is too real and it's too calm and it's too boring. And, I'll be damned. We were talking at coffee today, and I realized what a judgmental and just angry human I've been. And it really hit me at the rest of the meeting, because as I was sitting there stewing and fuming, even though people weren't cross talking and trying to, actually, bring me to school or call me on my BS, they were talking about a lot of the stuff that I had been speaking on. And if this had been, let's say, a couple months ago, I would probably just left the meeting and be like, F these people, But instead I stayed there and I listened. And the most hysterical thing happens to me after all of this. Listening to some guy talking about steps 6 and 7 and really truly, are you willing to truly let your higher power take away all of these character defects? And I'm just like, yeah, I am, but am I really? And I'm listening, all of a sudden some guy brings up, hey, the thing that helped me out was doing an AWOL group and a way of life, AWOL. And I'm laughing. I was like, oh, AWOL group. Yeah, that sounds cool. And then on Sunday, I'm calling my sponsor. And next thing I know, we're going to have an AWOL group. So my higher power realized that I was stagnant and that I needed to grow spiritually again, because I go in stages. I go body, mind, spirit, body, mind, spirit. And my spirit wants so badly to be grounded again and to be whole again and to embrace life again and to understand simplicity and peace and serenity on a whole different level. And I'm so excited because on Wednesday, not only is it my 5th year anniversary of sobriety, but it's going to be the start of a really deep dive into step work with a bunch of sober men in a community style setting, and we're going to work together and talk together and be together. And it's going to be pretty awesome because I feel privileged to be in a nice small group of men and to really just open up, be vulnerable, but also be able to take in other people's accounts of sobriety and how they've handled life. And then the privilege of being able to actually sit in circle and really just dive deep into the steps that once taken and worked correctly yield such a promising and wonderful life. And I realized that my powerlessness this last year, I think, was setting the stage so that I could really truly surrender and get to the next level. whatever that even means. I know for me, there's a lot of growing to do still, and that's what I love about life. Right? You hit these plateaus and these stagnant trails, and you're wondering, like, is it ever going to get better? Is there anything else? Is there anything more than this? Like, is there anything more to life than this? Like, is it really just wake up every day, do shit, go to work, come back, sleep, and then do it all over again and rinse and repeat? And it's a lot of times I feel like it is Groundhog Day, but my focus is what creates that redundancy. So I am so excited to get to revisit all the steps. I definitely want to truly embrace step 6 and 7, which comes down the pike. But, I was really stoked because I came across something that really struck me in the guts, and I really enjoyed the prayer, and it was, God, I don't care what I sound like or look like, who my partners are, or where I live. I just don't want to be like this anymore. On your terms, in your time, please remake me as you will. Thank you. And that's the energy that I'm willing to move forward in these next several months, because I realized that I've become so aware of all my character defects, but the awareness isn't enough. It's now the action necessary to allow the changes to happen, because we get so enamored with our defects of character because they were the things that we used to survive, to thrive when we were children, or when we were in really bad places with our lives, and we learned how to use our character defects to keep us alive. And I truly believe that our higher power is everything. So even like dysfunctional people, or people that don't have their shit together, or people that do have their shit together, it doesn't matter. Like, every person is an aspect of the higher power, and the higher power is going to do whatever it can to get your attention, whether it's good, bad, ugly, indifferent. It doesn't matter. And a lot of people struggle with the idea of a higher power. I think there's more people now in our country that don't believe in something bigger than themselves for the first time ever. And what I'm learning is the higher power. And again, this is my experience. I can't speak for anyone else. I can't talk about anyone else's experience, only mine. But what I'm learning is the higher power and the spirituality of the higher power is the glue that creates connection for all of us. And so many of us are dying for connection. And you don't even have to be an addict to a drug addict or an alcoholic to feel this lack of connection, because you have people addicted to Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, addicted to food, addicted to sex, addicted to porn, addicted to shopping, addicted to everything that they can be addicted to that allows them to not have to focus inwardly. And it's inwardly that you find your higher power. It's inwardly that you have the communication. And we have created such a society that's constantly ripping our attention apart to something other than what's within. And so I'm just really excited to explore powerlessness for myself this next several months. And, I'm really excited for this podcast, and I'm really excited to get this information out because I've been wanting to share it for a while. So God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And with that, I bid you adieu. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.